Hey, Sunny.
Hey, Sunny.
And our recording has started, so we are good to go on that front.
Hi, Sonny. Hello, Anton.
What's going on, Norbert?
Just out in Denver for some work stuff.
Oh,
Traveling.
nice. Denver's
Yeah.
a fun town.
It is. It is. How are you today?
Good, really good. Just living life,
Good.
Sonny,
Any
are you-
crazy weather coming across Nebraska?
Let's see, Tuesday night there was some tornadoes and hail, but it missed where I'm at, so
That's
I'll
good.
take it. A few weeks
Yeah.
back, we had a really nasty hailstorm, like tennis ball size hail, completely destroyed a
God.
couple towns. Yep. I think my vehicle's getting totaled out of it, so fun times.
Well, that's right on topic. I mean, that's pretty crazy stuff. So,
Yeah.
tennis ball size. Wouldn't that kill a person? Like
Yeah,
falling?
I left my vehicle outside and did not put it in the garage for that reason.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah, it broke some windows. I had to move away from the north side of my house while it was coming down.
Wow.
I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to do an audio check with our speaker. Sunny, are you able to hear us okay?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
We
Perfect.
can.
Excellent.
Wonderful. All right. AV check done. Resume, please.
Hey, Angela. Okay. Well, I guess we can start with some just general questions while we wait for people to trickle in. We were talking before this call, given at least in the Northeast, there's been a super big heat wave. I think it's kind of impacted most of the country. So, other than 95 degrees and super humid, what are folks' favorite weather? I can kickstart us. I like September weather, like late September, early October, where it's like 60, no humidity, light breeze, sweatshirt and shorts weather is kind of my ideal temperature. Anybody else? Yeah, Kelly, early October.
I'd say fall time as well.
Yeah, I agree with the fall as well, but I'm also a skier, so give me like 25 degrees and like a bunch of snow, and that could make for a great day.
Got a few claps on that one, so I think there's a couple other
Nice.
skiers in the group.
Sonny, what is your favorite weather?
It varies depending on the activity I'm doing. So if I'm going to go to the beach, I want it to be hot and dry. If I'm going to go hiking, I actually, weirdly enough, would prefer it be humid because I want to feel like I'm sweating out, like I'm getting a bigger workout in, which is silly. But on my day to day, I like it when it's either bright or it's raining. I actually really hate the wind. Like out of
Cool.
all the weather events, wind is my least favorite. You know, like when it's barely raining and it feels like someone's just like spitting nearby and you're like, stop.
Yeah.
That, not a fan.
Norbert, what's your favorite weather?
I think winter. Yeah, I would probably say I like January. I don't know, just ski and snowboard. So be my favorite weather. I hate being hot and sweaty. So but I love like doing like fun things. Like being at the beach and having to do that. But I would prefer it be cool or cold over being hot.
Camille, what about you?
I have to go with Kevin on this one. I'm a skier through and through, so I'll take that colder weather. If it's a bluebird day, that's even better. But that's where I'm at. I'm also a big fan of fall, so everything outside in the fall time. Okay. I think we are going to go ahead and get started for today. And there's a couple people who will be joining as we go. So first off, welcome to our flow call for the month of July. We're really excited for the content that we have prepared for you guys today. We get to hear from an amazing speaker, but it's an exciting topic and something that's definitely on top of mind for all of us. So I want to start out welcoming you all. I'm Camila Ellsworth. I'm the chair of Flow, and I'm a development associate with R Plus Hydro. We do pump storage. And then co-chair Norbert Woodhens and Katie Rain. And Kelly Rogers, if you haven't met her, she is our amazing counterpart from the NHA. So any questions you have, flow related or otherwise, definitely reach out to her. So a couple of housekeeping items to take care of before we really dive into the content today. First off, thank you all for those of you who applied for our first Rising Star Award. This is a new initiative that we're doing to recognize you all and your contributions to the industry and your outlook on the industry and the impact that you'll have. We are currently reviewing those applications. We'll be through that review process and have an update or notification on your application status mid-August. So stay tuned to that. We're targeting to have that done for our next call here or around that time. So we'll have an update then. Next month, our Flow meeting, it's going to be the last of our Flow summer camp programming. So we've had this whole lineup of really interesting topics that we've been going through, and we're ending on a high note they've all been high notes, but we're ending on another one with the state of the hydro industry. And that is going to be August 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It's just in time for the National Hydropower Day. The content of that meeting is going to be industry experts, and they're going through what our current landscape is on water power. And that's going to prepare us for some asks that the NHA has and some engagement that we can do on National Hydropower Day on August 24th. It'll be a whole week of celebrations since the actual day is a Saturday. So doesn't that turn the whole holiday into the whole week? So if you join our flow call, then we'll be giving you tools so that you can engage with your local officials, post on social media and spread the word to your friends and colleagues. So stay tuned there. And flow at Clean Currents. Clean Currents is right around the corner. Today is the last day of early bird registration, so keep that in mind. We're currently finalizing our off-site networking event venue. It's looking like we're going to be at the Birdie Time Pub. This venue has indoor mini golf and a golf simulator, so it's going to be a really fun venue, great opportunity for us all to network and get to know each other even better and strengthen those connections. It's really an environment for flow participants and those who are early career professionals or new to the hydropower industry to network with each other. So spread the word about the event, especially as we're getting closer to Clean Currents. Right now it's listed under 40 years old, but again, it's an environment for all who are new to hydropower, and want to participate and engage in the industry and get to know people. So pass that message along to anyone who's older than 40, but you're new to the water power. We want to get you involved and engaged as well. Flow participants also receive 50% off of registration. This actually takes a significant amount of money off of the registration and can be a big selling point to your organization. If you need help justifying your attendance at an industry event, Flow's prepared a whole article, powerhouse article with some tips and tricks on how to communicate and advocate for attending. Right. Those are our Flow announcements. Now we get to jump into the fun, the heart and content of this call. Our topic today is climate change and hydro. We have a great speaker lined up, Sunny Wescott. Before Sunny takes over, please remember to mute yourselves while Sunny is presenting to ensure that our recording does not have any background sound. We'll open up to a Q&A after Sunny's presentation. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat and Sunny will look at those at the end of her presentation. Now over to Sunny.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and both start a timer and share my screen so that I can make the most use of the time that I have with you today. So we're going to go over a little bit of a 101 on what we expect when we're talking about climate change, what kind of cascading impacts, how to be able to deliver this message in a meaningful way, especially as you go to propagate out this data a little bit further. So the first graphic that you're going to see that we're going to talk about is NOAA's NCEI graphics. If you don't play around with them, highly recommend that you give them a look. They update them every month, every season, every year, and they go back a couple of decades. What they do is they help to clean up some of the noise and they give you meaningful visuals. Things like this graphic, which showcases our 10 hottest years on record against where we're currently at, where the black line at the top, that well supersedes all the other lines. What this means when we go forward, when we're talking about forecasting impacts from weather events, is that all of our models that are based off of particular baselines historically are now going to be violated because we're so well above the baseline. We're so well above our other record breaks even that we actually don't have precedent to compare the events that we're going to be experiencing to. We can say that we've seen all of these weather events in concept before, but we don't see them the same way we're seeing them now. We were talking about hail just before this call. To note that hail forms faster now and thereby has less air in it means that even the hail that we saw from 20 years ago that was baseball-sized hail is not the same density as the hail that we're seeing now. The hail we have now is more dense, and that can cause it to be even more damaging than what we're used to seeing. And so this is going to be something that you'll apply to each one of the weather hazards that we're talking about as we go forward. Higher heat has a cascading impact across the board. And what that looks like when we talk about the impact across the entire US is that as you change that temperature, you change the way that your frontal boundaries come in. Your frontal boundaries are attached to your low pressures. Your low pressures are the way that we annotate that there's a compression in the atmosphere from the top of the troposphere, so the tropopause, all the way down to here at the surface. This compression allows for water molecules to sort of interact with each other in that faster rate. What that does is it triggers rainfall events, it triggers down mixing of wind, so wind from the upper level of the atmosphere to be able to shift down to the surface. This drives all of the weather that we have across the board. Low pressures are our weather producers, so it's important to understand that when we say that as temperature changes, our lows change, that this is really what we're talking about. They become deeper, they become heavier hitting, and they slow down. Now, when we have a slowed down storm, we know there's twofold. We know it's more damaging precipitation, wind, storm-wise, but also on the back end, it means there's more time until the next low comes in, the next weather event. That means more time under your high pressures, which means more direct solar radiation, more heating, more evaporation. So this creates a secondary impact, and it also sucks more moisture up and out of the earth and holds it hostage in the atmosphere right above that area, so that by the time the next low comes in, it now has more to work with as it creates its storm system, more energy, more moisture, and just a greater impact at the surface because those soils had to release that moisture content. So what this means across the board is that all of our highs and lows move like horses on a carousel. So if you think about the US as a portion of that carousel, the entire northern hemisphere is the entire carousel that I'm referencing. So the lows would be coming in through either our Pacific Northwest or our northern plains. They come in just like a horse on a carousel. It drops down after coming in at an up, drops down along the front range of the Rocky Mountains, picks up along the mid-Atlantic up and into the Northeast, and then exits out and into the Atlantic, or it comes in through a different portion of the US, more along the Central California area, and it moves a little bit less in that north-south variation, comes across the Rocky Mountains, stays relatively mid-range, and then exits out. So you have a twofold that can occur, one being more La Nina driven, which is more extremes in your highs and your lows in that north-south variation, or more of an El Nino where it's straight across, more of a boring ride when it comes to carousel weather. When we're looking at this, it's important to understand that every weather event that kicks off in the US is contributed to a low pressure, whether it's a tropical cyclone or a continental cyclone, doesn't matter. It then moves off and over to another country along the northern hemisphere, coming back around again inevitably about every month and a week or two. We see very similar low pressures that have either been three lows that have merged together into one low or have split apart into three lows. this sort of continuous accordion effect that we have within them, but nonetheless always progressing from the west to the east, and always with that north-south variation to be taking into account. Highs being the area of no weather, lows being the areas of the storm in the way in which we understand it here at the surface. So this just sort of helps to draw that in as a graphic to understand that if we have deeper lows, we have stronger tropical cyclones because they are low. We have more damaging wind and rain. So our aging infrastructure that was not built to be around this long even is now getting hit harder and harder each time. And we have this concept that if we can't visually see the damage, that there is no damage to be had. If you, for example, look at a couple of different things, a bicycle helmet, and you hit your head, you know that the material inside has compressed. Same thing with the bumper of a car. It has compressed after impact. You're supposed to replace it to recreate that air gap that you need in order to handle the force of the next impact. So what we've done with our infrastructure is we haven't been replacing it at that same rate. So you'll notice that infrastructure will break more easily from the weather events. As the weather events get even stronger, you're going to see even more notable breaks. You're also going to see the slower moving systems are going to come with more damaging swarms of weather, more prolonged drought between them, more heat impacts, heat waves, more evaporation, more plant decay, more aquifer collapse. There's all of these cascading impacts that happen when you change even a fraction of that weather carousel. So when I look at this here in my agency, what I do is I break all of that weather and all of the change down into two components. One being our 8 main weather hazards that are amplified by the uneven distribution of heat across the northern hemisphere, most notably. It makes it a lot easier for them to chew on that. And then you have 16 critical infrastructure sectors. So you're able to look at these two side by side and say, I know that heat impacts XYZ materials. It impacts all of the transportation sector. It impacts our minerals, metals, agricultural, all of that. And we're able to go and find them within each of these critical infrastructures to say that it impacts their site, their staff, society, or their security. And that really helps bring them to the table to have this discussion about weather. Even if they don't believe that the climate is changing, they can understand that the impact to their sector is increasing, that damage is occurring, and that they need to do something about it. And being able to understand that this is happening in the sense of dollars really helps to drive them forward. So this is the $1 billion disaster graphic, most recently updated at the beginning of July. 15 confirmed weather disasters, over $1 billion each. You'll also notice there are 3 others to be added in. So we're actually at 18 after those clear through with total implication. We're not even into the full scope of the year. Our wildfires are just now starting to get out of control. Our tropical cyclones season just really began. And our severe weather is going to persist throughout the entire year. Severe weather is always number 1 in these graphics because it is 1 year round, 2 most widespread, and 3 getting stronger in every aspect of the storm. Hail, lightning, flash flood, damaging straight line winds, tornadic activity, all of those are increasing. So severe weather will continue to lead the way in damage as well as in prevalence of power outages, which we'll also talk about. You'll see here what we talk when we talk, when was your infrastructure built? Well, like the metro and the DC area was built in the late 60s. Where was the late 60s on this graphic? There it is. Okay, what would they have used historically for their weather data? Would they have looked at it being warmer? Would they have looked at it being cooler? Would they have planned for any of these other effects? And then you look at where we're at now in the 1991 to 2020 era, where we've been living on the infrastructure that was built in previous decades. You can see that we're not really built to the temperatures we're starting to see as is. Now, some people will see this graphic and they'll say that's only 1 degree up, Sunny. That doesn't really matter. Well, you can't really sustain metal or concrete at 110 degrees for 2 weeks straight because the material softens. We have built our stuff to a more stable temperature than what we're currently experiencing. That creates a major issue for operations. It also creates a major issue for water prevalence because a lot of our rivers, dams, and canals are lined with concrete, and thereby they absorb, and the ones that aren't, the soil is absorbing. So this creates additional issues across the water sector in the absorption rates and the cracking rates of some of those materials and metal composites. And then, of course, the cascading impact that we have to all of the ecology surrounding those. You'll also notice where some of the precipitation is starting to fall. Higher evaporation rates are really enabling that, but the higher heat content on one side that's building up those storms is allowing the storms to move into the central plains with far more energy and intensity than they had historically. So the areas that are seeing the amplified rainfall are not the areas that want to see it. A good analogy that I usually use to express the change in temperature and in humidity not yielding rainfall is that you can go in a sauna and you can create both of those all the way up to the top that sauna can actually handle: high heat, high humidity. A rain cloud does not form in the sauna. It does not rain. No thunderstorm develops. You have a closed unit. What you need is you need that uplift mechanism to be able to create a forced column of air like that. And we don't have that without the low pressures. If we don't have the low pressures coming in or a boundary of instability, then we don't get the thunderstorm. So we can get very hot and very humid conditions without it giving us the beneficial rain, which means that's even more damaging to the vegetation that needs to sweat. It's more damaging to the people who are out and operating. And it's more damaging to the minerals and metals that we need to keep stable in order to continue to operating, especially in the water sector. Looking at where we're going for the future, I'm sure many of you have already played around with the National Climate Assessments graphic page. These are from there. They just showcase to you that winter temperatures are going to be going up pretty widespread across our northern plains and Alaska and the Northeast. So where is that? That's where all of our snowpacks are that we desperately need. You'll note that the last couple of years, some of the snowpacks in different pockets have shifted. This year, it was the Midwest and the New England states who paid that price. What that means is they usually see 80 to 90 inches of snowfall in some areas, and instead they saw 8 to 9 inches. That creates a huge issue when it comes to the natural reserve system for water. If that snow falls as rain or doesn't fall until later in the season, it creates major issues for the way in which they hold water and the way in which they distribute that water. So when we look at evaporation and heat as damaging to the sector, we're also looking at floodwaters, premature snowpack melt, greater rates of avalanches, and all of these additional impacts from temperature variance. Again, it does not need to be very high. Temperatures don't need to soar to 110 degrees. If they're 34 degrees instead of 25 degrees, that's still a very notable impact. But also that variance right around the freezing level in the upper atmosphere is really what dictates whether or not you get snow or rain anyway. So when some people want to argue back and say it's not that big of a change, it's important to understand that a small amount, much like the butterfly effect, a small amount carries forward in all of these weather events as we go. When we're looking at the impacts to the critical infrastructure sectors, it's important to break them out by sector because water is used in all of them. So when we're talking to the IT sector and everybody wants to talk about cyber, okay, well, in order to run cyber, you need water for ChatGPT, you need water to run your Boolean searches on Google, you need water across the board just to be able to cool the facilities that the data centers are held in. You need, in order to run your databases on site, you need HVAC. We know this. If your HVAC goes out, your site shuts down. We know that in your home, if your HVAC goes out, that your equipment overheats. My laptop needs water cooling in order to not overheat when I do research. Same problem set. Communication, another big issue. When you're out and you're trying to respond in rural areas and it's too hot, your phone will drop connection. It'll degrade from 5G to 4G, or it won't turn on at all. Chemicals that are used, whether it's chlorine or otherwise, cannot be stored in incredibly high temperatures. This means along the rail tracks as well. So if we're saying that the railways are starting to warp and we're not able to commute our loads as fast on them, so we can't move as much, we can't run as fast, this means that it's more temperature variance on the actual storage car for the chemical, which can yield additional concerns because should anything happen to that rail car, whether it falls off track because of that kink or it has an incident with the actual railway itself where something happens to that rail car, it's now entering into the water system nearby. That's a major implication when we go forward. Critical manufacturing needs a ton of water, so they're located along our river systems. We know that the nuclear sector is as well. Both of these, when they pull water out, in order to operate, they need to put the water back out, and they put out hotter water than what they took in, which when your rivers are already running hotter, major issue set. When we're talking about some of these IT sectors, it's also important to understand that not all of them are working in a copacetic means. Some of them, like our cryptocurrency, are buddied up with major dams because it's a major reservoir of water, and they're just pulling from it and putting it back in, not necessarily checking to see how much is evaporating out because they're raising that baseline. So some of these are more parasitic bonding than what we'd like to see, but because there's a financial implication, that consideration may not be taken into account. So it's important to look at these as all of a holistic impact that if you change your water availability, temperature, security, safety of it, all of that has an immediate cascade to all of the other sectors, especially with healthcare, given that people naturally want to go into the water when it's hot, and some of these impacts will be carrying forward into the water sector in that way. These are some of the graphics that the NCEI provides you. You can see where those record-breaking temperatures are. It's not the western half of the US. The record-breaking temperatures over the last couple of months have been in the Midwest, through the Great Lakes, up and into the Northeast, and along the Mid-Atlantic. Those abnormal temperatures carried all the way up into Maine. You'll notice the flooding events were right on that boundary. Our tornadic activity was right on that boundary. Wildfires are on the back end of that. We had tornadoes, fires, and temperature variance in Alaska, but we also saw record snowfall and rainfall in Alaska. So you're going to notice that even a small degree of shift can carry with it these amplifications across each one of these weather hazards. And in all fairness, we've seen these weather hazards before in singular instances, maybe sometimes duplicative, but usually not this many weather events at once coming into the area at the intensity that they are and sticking around for as long as they are. That's where the problem set really lies. When you look at this as a US problem, or even a state or a region, you end up sort of honing in on just your problem set, which can make this a more blindsiding effect when some of the other countries come to the table. So you can see that the temperature variance isn't just the US. Because our frontal boundaries move on that carousel, it's important to understand that as we suffer, others do as well. You can search for the same event here in the US. On every other continent, you will find another country going through the exact same problem at the same time. Now, the reason that this is important is because materials. If you need chlorine and everyone else needs chlorine because of a major temperature spike across the board and all of their water sector needs it, you're going to be competing with them on costs. You're going to be competing for concrete cement mixtures, green concrete, especially. When you're looking at some of these mineral and metal hubs, knowing where your precious metals come from is also important if you need them for any part, the grading system, some of the actual canals themselves, the lining material for the canals. All of that has a major implication across the board if everyone's getting hit with the same problems and looking for the same resources, especially with cooling mechanisms. When we're talking about this, we need to be looking at it as everyone's got a different part to contribute, whether it's in pain or in solution. When we're looking at the tornadic activity and the damage that it brings, it's important to understand that this isn't one state. It's not just Tornado Alley. It's Tornado Alley, it's the Great Lakes, it's the Southeast, it's the Northeast, it's even all the way up in Alaska last month. So again, looking at this, going across the board, the record breaks that we're seeing in damaging weather events are not isolated. Needing to look at the areas that had frequently seen those weather events, look for their best practices, and implement them in the new area is really the key part that we're missing. When people say, what am I supposed to do about this? It's blowing 110-mile-per-hour winds over here. Well, Montana sees those pretty frequently. So does Wyoming. What did they do about it? How did they harden their supporting dependent infrastructure along their water sector to be able to withstand those winds? Can we replicate that in another area? What about high temperatures and materials? The desert Southwest sees temperatures over 100 degrees pretty frequently. What did they do about it? What materials are they using? Can that be repeated over here in the Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast? All of these considerations to look at who hit what pain points, but it's not just the US. Needing to look internationally at the other water sectors to see what they've been doing about it is really important. When we're talking about the severe storms we were talking about earlier, this touches on that. You'll notice that we've started really using the word record-breaking hail a lot, whether it's in the intensity of the event as far as major hail size goes, or it's the amount of hail, or the fact that that area usually never sees hail. That's a big part. When you look at some of the hail that's fallen recently over the last 6 years, we've hit record break across the board. We now have added in a new category for some of our hail. So instead of just going up to grapefruit, we're now including cantaloupe-sized hail. That's important to understand. If a cantaloupe falls out of the sky at 150 miles per hour, weighing about 8 pounds, it's a pretty notable amount of pain that you're going to experience at that point, as well as any infrastructure that's outside, anything. Materials are not meant to get hit that hard from above. So when we're looking at some of the changes that temperature brings, it brings an increase in straight line wind damage that takes out your power transmission. That can impact hydro. It can impact your cleaning, your pumping. It can impact everything downstream, but it also blows debris in. That can become a problem set. It does create more dust storms. We know that dust storms bring in arsenic and mercury into the river system. That's problematic. That's too high of a concentration. When we're looking at the hail damaging other things like pump stations, that's a big problem set because then you have to do restoration. At the same time, the whole area is competing for restoration materials. So again, looking at this holistically across the board, if supercells are increasing in size and in intensity and in coverage area, needing to pre-plan for them now so you're not in a scramble later is a big part of what I do when I advocate to others. When we're looking at the energy sector, again, looking at this as severe weather really leads the way here. The more severe weather I say that we're going to experience based off of all these variances, the more power outages we're going to see. And the longer these power outages are going to get, twofold, more damage being done, more areas competing for restoration at the same time. So this becomes a major issue set. You'll also notice that it's not just one sector. It's not just, for example, the pipelines that are taking damage from these weather events from heat causing them to shift or from just the general overexpansion of the materials. It's also our solar panels getting hit, our wind turbines getting struck by lightning, our straight line winds damaging all of the above. This becomes a major issue. And then, of course, drought along the hydroelectric sector. So you're going to see that each energy sector is taking a hit, which means that diversifying and making smaller, more interconnected systems will really be the lean forward as we go into how do we solve this crisis across the board, across rural and developed areas. When we're looking at the flashing flash floods, these flashier flash floods, what this really means is that it's just more water coming down at once. You're still going to see your year's worth of water, for example. It's a good advocation to somebody who works in the agricultural industry. You'll still see all of it. The downside is you won't have a rainy season anymore. You're now going to have a rainy month. And then from that, in a couple of years, you're going to have a rainy week. And that rainy week is going to devastate everything in that area. That's incredibly problematic to plan for. It's hard to be able to figure out where you're going to put that water so that it lasts you the rest of the year, or it lasts you until the next low comes in, giving their slowing down. You need to make more out of these weather events as they're coming in, which creates a need for really innovative solutions as we go forward, looking at this being not only damaging, but looking at the intensity shift. That's what this graphic really showcases to you, is where the precipitation is going through the water cycle in a faster rate or a slower rate. Those areas in red, the atmospheric river events are changing. They're not as frequent as they used to be, but they are far more damaging now. Same thing with tropical cyclones, not as frequent as far as landfall in those particular areas, which built two smaller tropical waves, tropical depressions. We're not seeing those now. Now we're seeing a hurricane, and the hurricane sucks up all the energy that would have been maybe 2 or 3 tropical depressions. So there's going to be a major shift in the way in which we operate our water security going forward, and the safety of the water, given that these heavier rainfalls are intermixing and pulling more in with them. When we're talking about fire weather, it's just important to understand that this plays a major role in sediment flows, as well as, of course, the cyclical nature of once you lose that vegetation, you lose some of your purification naturally that occurs before the water gets into the river system at whole. So you're going to see a lot more in the way of conversations about PFAS and microplastics making their way into the rivers, into the reservoirs, what that means for the ecology of the area. When you lose these trees, you lose shading for the water systems as well, which means the water will get even hotter, even more evaporation. Greater problem sets. Your soil is now looser, more of it flows in, absolutely. Some of it compacts, which means it can't absorb as much or as fast. And that means more runoff, more overtopping of your dams and your reservoirs, which we know that is the number one reason that those fail, is because of overtopping. When we look at this as a holistic change, you can see where the wildfires create a major issue, which then contributes to everything else downstream. More algae blooms are absolutely expected across the board. So you're going to see this as a major problem set. 1, because air pollution, huge issue. 2, the black carbon deposits are often too much arsenic and mercury. 3, when it does finally rain next or it snows next, that immediately pulls all of those harmful materials down into the river, filling it from the bottom up, feeding the algae blooms, depleting the amount of actual vegetation that will want to grow in that area besides your scraggly brush, creating a self-fulfilling cycle. Drought's going to continue to get worse, which means the wildfires will get worse, which means that the winds will continue to amplify because there won't be as much trees blocking the force. There won't be as much cooling. There'll be more thermal heating. This creates all of these cascading interlinked effects. All of these interlinked effects have immediate impacts on the surface because we didn't build to operate within this amplified realm. So it's not to say when you talk to a stakeholder that they should be aware it's going to rain 8% more this year. It's how many flood events are too many flood events for you? How much damage is too much damage? What can you do about it? What have you done about it? So a lot of the conversation we talk about drought is really water security and safety. Should the water be in reservoirs above the surface? Should we be looking at burying water? Should we be looking at how do we keep our aquifers stable, our rivers stable? How do we cover things to keep the atmosphere from taking them away? All of these secondary concepts that have to come into play besides just acknowledging it's getting worse. Another big part of the reservoir system to understand when you communicate with others about water safety is that water weighs a lot. Naturally, it fell to the lowest elevations. A lot of our lowest elevations are along our fault lines. It's where our tectonic plates are. Subsequently, well, where they touch, where we end up having this natural pressure that we put in, we dammed it up, there was seismic activity, and then it held everything stable. The downside with drought is that some of it's rising at varying rates, and then the flood comes in and pushes down. You're ending up with a lot of push-pull, and that pumping mechanism is creating weakness within those surface areas, and that's causing an increase in seismic activity. There's a lot of research backing this. If anybody wants to know more, we are going to be doing a white paper just in a couple of months that's going to come out from CISA that's going to talk a lot about this. So you'll see even more information as we go forward about seismic activity and the prevalence there from drought and from flood events. Looking at subsidence as a major issue, we know that overpumping the aquifers can allow for that soil to collapse in on itself. Subsequently, everything that was built on it now compresses down and into that gap. This is becoming a major issue. Wells are dropping. They're getting very hard to access. They're getting more expensive to maintain. The aquifer, once it starts to collapse, will be permanent damage. There'll be no more aquifer there, which we've noticed in Utah. If you lose your aquifer or your aquifer compresses too much and the next flood event comes in, that water will bleed from underground up. You're also noticing here on this graphic where the reservoirs are really helping to stabilize those soils as we go forward. So when we're talking about the actual implications, this is going to be, we need smaller reservoirs. We still need reservoirs. We need to be able to hold the water safe and sound for when we need to access it for agriculture, cooling, and all of these other things. How do we do that? Is it still major water systems, or is it smaller, more capable aquifers, more capable reservoir systems? And then, of course, as we're coming into the conclusion here, because we're getting a little close on time, sea level rise. This one's really important to understand because it's going to change the way our river systems flow out. The sea level rise being a major impact because as the temperature increases, so does the water level, because just like boiling water on the stove, each of those water molecules expanding just in general, that concept of them bleeding in because they're getting bigger, they're also obviously evaporating. But just like water on the stove in that same container, you're going to see that twofold effect where it both evaporates out and boils over. Same thing on Earth, because there's only so much water on Earth as there ever has been, as there ever will be. Atmospheric rivers are going to continue to get worse. That's going to be a major impact as we go forward because there is going to be more damage. They are going to carry more rain or more snow with them. Subsequently, they're going to last just a little bit longer, but there will be fewer of them. So this is just important to be able to see all the different studies, all the different impact areas, and the statistics applicable to that. Algae blooms are getting worse. The bacteria is getting worse, such as E. coli in certain areas. Cholera is getting worse globally, and our cholera vaccine stockpile is going down. And then, of course, my favorite, the brain-eating amoeba, which is spreading because freshwater resources where it really likes to propagate are increasing during flash flood events, and they're able to puddle jump, which is terrifying. So when we talk about some of the impacts to the water sector, when we're talking about safety, we're also talking about being safe from some of these other secondary effects from abnormally warm areas, abnormally warm rainfall, and then, of course, stagnant areas where it doesn't rain as often, and thereby the flow is reduced, allows for a lot of this propagation as a concern as we go forward. If the lows continentally are getting stronger, so are tropical cyclones. They're also lows. So the rainfall, storm surge, winds, all going to be increasing with these. And then the heat on the back end of them, major concerns for mosquito breeding grounds, for the availability of safe water. And then, of course, just for the spread of illness across the board. You're going to notice that this will be a problem in every country. We saw a couple of different tropical cyclones last year have winds produced over 200 miles per hour, with, I believe, 216 before a sensor got destroyed in Taiwan is the end out of last year. So we are looking at major concerns from wind blowing in debris, trees, you name it. And then, of course, the flash flooding and the saltwater incursion that's going to push in on the back end of these events. Just to be aware that the snowpacks obviously are changing as the material gets darker, as more black carbon gets deposited, as our vegetation changes, smaller vegetation, more propagated vegetation because of the heat waves, premature snowpack melt, more grasses, more weeds. This is going to continue to fuel the cycle of our snowpack starting later in the year and then inevitably decreasing in its entirety just due to the amount of runoff or due to the amount of snowpack slip. So you'll see that that's going to decrease on the west first, and then we'll really start to see it carry over across the eastern half of the United States, across the entirety of those mountain sectors. And what that means as we go forward is that your dams are more likely to take additional damage from snowpack melt, as well as flooding problems. And then, of course, you have your low-flowing river issues where more of the dam is exposed to high heat, drought, and the direct cracking that could cause, the freeze-thaw concerns in the winter going from hot to cold to hot to cold. Most of that material was not built to expand and contract at that rate, thereby it's cracking more frequently. It's also not built to be around this long. So it's important to understand that they had failure rates already built into them and that we're approaching that anyway. So it's a two-pronged issue. Really being able to communicate to everybody that the hotter water does have changes besides to the materials and the safety, to the drought levels being able to impact barge movements, which impacts our supply chain, but also our fish are getting bigger in some areas. Some fish that naturally grow larger in warmer waters, you're seeing them reach maturity earlier, lay eggs earlier, move into areas they wouldn't normally move into, or move out of areas they used to live in. Subsidence also contributing to that as we're losing some of the water levels in some of these areas, more compressed lakes, more sediment flows, changes in our arsenic, mercury, and other harmful mineral metal levels. This becomes a major interlinked ecology threat as we go forward. It's not just one sector. It's not just one problem set. It's across the board. And then, of course, we have even more effects. It's not just the surface. It's not just what we're doing, right? The moon naturally does this 18.5-year rotation where it just changes the way that the droplet that we operate within of water either compresses or expands into a teardrop shape. Coming up in the 2030s, it'll change into the teardrop shape as the moon tilts away from us as it rotates. What that's going to do is it's going to raise all of the king tides. And so if we're already seeing sea level rise as a problem set now, then in the mid 2030s, it's going to be even greater of a problem set. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind when you're doing model planning, or you're doing advocacy for resiliency, or you're thinking of innovative ways to solve problems, that you're looking at it as a holistic issue set. And then, of course, this one just really highlights the freeze-thaw cycles, the spalding, the cracking, the major issues for various dam sizes across the U.S., and the fact that we're losing a lot of our snowpack and what that means for our stream flows come spring and summer. We're looking at earthen dams. It should be noted that they are also made out of materials that do not like high heat. They compress, they crack, they naturally erode over time. So being able to go back and revisit a lot of these things to look for problem sets before the problem fully breaches, and to be able to communicate with the general region that this is an issue they need to be aware of, that the earthen dams will naturally weaken after every major heat wave, not just every year, not just every couple of years, but every heat wave will cause damage. And so that requires a lot more inspection and a lot more risk to the downstream communities, as some of these earthen dams, if the dam nearby fails, then all the earthen dams fail at the exact same time. You end up with a domino effect, which can look something like this. If you end up with too much water, you lose your bridges, you lose your areas of stability nearby. You lose a lot of your water sector's capability in that moment. You have to either release too much water, you don't get hydroelectric out of it, or you take damage from it, or you don't get enough river water and subsequently end up seeing a bunch of negative news about how barges are being impacted. The Watson Dam system can't function. The fish are dying off in mass and they have to go out and be cleaned up in order for barges to be able to move. There's a interlinked effect either direction that needs to be taken into consideration. And then on the innovative side, as we're ending out, to understand that there are some things in the works right now, like tidal power, which doesn't produce a ton of power, but it is diversifying the portfolio, which is helpful. It's also something that you can think about as putting in as a barrier system for some of the increased wave heights. So there's a secondary benefit there if you make it strong enough. And then repurposing coal mines into a pumped hydro storage like facility and keeping the water underground, but in the same general area it would have naturally fallen, in coal mines that we had already dug out that we're no longer using, and that need to be kept from compressing in and collapsing in on themselves from being empty anyway. So this becomes a win-win on either, but the downside being that we don't know what we don't know. And so when we shift over to some of these things, really watching for fallout activity of other impacts and being able to properly annotate those and speak to those without saying that it was a failed attempt, but that more so we are trying and we are looking for innovative solutions across the board. So I know that was a lot of negativity all at once, but we ended on a semi-positive note with an innovative move in either direction, both our coastlines and further inland, to stabilize some of these problem sets. So if you have any questions or you ever want to engage on any of these topics, this is my contact information. Some of the things I do, like the Extreme Weather Working Group, which is bi-weekly, you are welcome to join if you would like to hear more or talk to some of our stakeholders, or to be able to present a new project that you're doing, you're welcome to reach out there. And with that, pending any questions, that concludes my brief.
That was awesome. Thank you very much, Sunny. That was a plethora of information and very, very cool things that I had no clue about. And so we're going to turn this over to questions right now. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand. Did I see a hand go up? Mark Christian, please. You have the floor.
Oh, awesome. Hey, that was incredible. Just want to echo, this was great. So Mark Christian, EPRI, I'm leading up, amongst other things, our Climate Ready Hydro Working Group, right? And so part of that is we're trying to map out sort of the universe or the intersectionality of climate and hydro. So you ran through a ton of very relevant sort of impact cases. Do you have that sort of formalized in any publicly available document, right? That's the animal, right? We're trying to map it out in a digestible way for utilities. And so that would be a great resource if you have sort of that brain dump documented. I'd love to be able to include all that.
There is the Atlas of, I say it's the Atlas of Disaster or something like that. But there is a 800-page document that has amazing interconnected charts that are like the spider graphic from high school and college for creating your thesis papers. And they did it with each major implication and then the cascade and the interlink to the others. It's a huge graphic that if I showed it on my screen, it'd be insanely tiny font. But it is a very helpful graphic to be able to depict not only the initial onset of the problem, drought, heat, flood, whatever, but then all the way down to social unrest, the trading of the water sector, resource allocation, who develops and where they develop and why. All of those interconnects, it sort of plinkos through the problem set that you're able to not only showcase all of it at once and then highlight, we're going to talk about this to this to this to this to this for a specific briefing. So there's some benefit to that graphic set. It is 800 pages of a lot of data, great visuals. They did a fantastic job. I do believe it's called the Atlas of Disaster. If anybody wants to Google it and throw it in the chat, I'm pretty positive that's correct. But there's within my work in and of itself, just all of the different interlinks, you're able to draw all of them and pull all the different studies. But as far as like a similar like this to this to this, that is, I think, something that's missing from each sector, from each weather event, is to be able to succinctly draw all of those impacts and all of those statements in one spot.
Okay. Thanks for the resource.
Yeah, Atlas of Disaster.
Awesome. Let's see if there's any questions in the chat. Anybody? From Renee, how do we get more info on the climate? Do we already answer that? No. On the Climate Ready Working Group. Make sure I'm not going out of order here.
Is that for the last?
I think so. Yep. Right.
Is that for me? I'll drop it in the chat. Yeah, absolutely happy to share what we have. We're about to release sort of the interim version of our matrix that does kind of go through the intersectionality. But again, being able to, like, Sunny, all of your like brain dump, oh my God, it'd be great for like, we're still soliciting feedback, right? Because in the end, nobody has all the bits and bobs. And the challenge too is like, okay, like at what point do we care? Which is the other animal too. So like, again, your insight, incredible. Thank you.
It is like
I'll
the
drop
Atlas
ready
of
stuff in the chat.
Yeah, like the Atlas of Disaster, like going into some of the detail, even at presentations. I once gave a 3-hour briefing and I still didn't cover all of the knowledge about the one region I was speaking about. And some of these become very expansive very quickly if you want to touch on every secondary and tertiary event that can kick off from it. So being able to scope the impacts and the events without going too fine into the details, but also knowing where those fine details are, it is a very heavy lift.
That is awesome. All right. Any other questions? Please don't hold back. Let's pick Sunny's brain while we have her.
I have one question. Oh, Mark, do you have another question?
No, well, I do, but I don't want to just monopolize all the time. Again,
Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Well,
yes.
no, Renee. Okay. So something we're looking at right now is we're applying the 9505. So it's the long-term climatological data set out of Oak Ridge National Lab. We're applying it to the NID, looking at KPIs affiliated with dam operation. The challenge there being is that in a lot of cases, Sonny, you hit the nail on the head, right? It's like, okay, we're able to get sort of directionally correct changes, or in the 9505 data set case, we're able to look at, average daily inflows. The challenge here being is that, that averaging mutes some of the peakiness that we really care about, especially when it comes to like flooding events, which everyone cares about. Have you found, or is there a good resource that you use in sort of translating those more generic implications to the severe impacts that we really care about, right? So taking that sort of daily average and then being able to apply it to sort of a hourly average, or something along those lines. So being able to scrub away some of that averaging that comes with sort of longer term climatological and hydrological modeling.
It really comes down to how much data you have in your data set. If you're, for some of our ASOSs, they do hourly. And so the automated sensors that do hourly, you're able to go back and you can set a large language model to train to say, I want to know the hourly, and it'll do it on its own if you have the data set within a means in which you can ingest it. So if you have the
Mhm.
data, it's just really about knowing what you want to showcase. So if you say the average per day, because it is a lot of data for it to run through and it is cumbersome and heavy, but there are collectives now where you can put in a petition to be able to use some of the supercomputers if you don't have a
Mm.
supercomputer. And that's sort of another like carbon, green flag, is to say that sort of like carpooling. We're carpooling our data analysis instead of creating a new supercomputer or doing some of the carbon imprint of running that data set. You could turn over your data sets or share them even in an attempt to sort of garner, hey, we would love to know XYZ. We have this. Do you have this? Share in the middle
Mhm.
ground and then run analysis that way is also another good cookie sort of write out for that. But when it comes to weather, when we talk about averages, especially when we talk about temperatures, we look at the dailies so that we're able to say this day is the hottest day on
Mhm.
record, the last hottest day, but it is not the hottest against like the average or something. So we give a lot of those statistics. They're not always super helpful. So if we say this was rainier than like the most rainy June, and that this day, particularly like the 17th
Mhm.
of June, has never rained this much ever. Is that actually helpful data? Or are we just using that to say one thing or another, needing to understand that it's never rained that much that early in June? It's usually an end of June thing. So you do need the dailies to be able to
Mhm.
showcase things are happening earlier and earlier in the month. And then you need the monthlies to showcase the overwhelming, load one way or the other. And then you need the annuals, which is why NCEI does such a good job with the monthly and then the annual and seasonal. But when you come down to points, I do think it is needing to have the database and then being able to run analysis on each of the columns essentially that you have data for,
Yeah.
which is cumbersome
Okay.
again.
No, but that was really, really helpful. Thank you. I really appreciate that insight.
I
Katie,
guess
do you have a
I'll,
question?
yeah. So there's a lot of bad things that are happening, but you mentioned at the end, converting some of the coal mines into pump storage facilities. And I'm wondering if there's other ways besides being clean energy that hydro can help mitigate some of these risks. Like I was thinking of algal blooms, so you can control flows so the water's not stagnant. Maybe having a hydro plant in a river could be a benefit there. Anything else that you can think of?
Yes. So some of the ways that hydro can be incredibly helpful is more sensors, in all fairness, more data, because some of these harmful metals, materials, minerals, we don't know are moving until they show up in a reservoir downstream, and we don't necessarily know where they came from unless there's a lot of sensors along the way. We have our river gauges, but not all the river gauges do sampling, for example. So if we know there's an algae bloom problem, and we know there's a harmful algae bloom within the larger algae bloom issue, the issue becomes, where did it propagate out from? And is there something that we could do where it still serves its purpose in the area it's in a smaller amount? It's not matting out. For those of you who don't know, an algae bloom sort of is nature's attempt to reverse the heating that's occurring. So what it does is it takes all of the oxygen, minerals, and metals that are available, things like too much wildfire smoke, and it fuels this creation of a shading that occurs over the area. The downside is it sucks out all the oxygen and it kills off almost everything in its area, and it becomes toxic to us. The upside is that it cools down the water, so that you have to be able to meet it halfway. So if we know where it's coming from, we know that that water's too hot or it has too much of the mineral or metal that's producing the algae bloom, we're able to reduce it. So if we know where the problem is, we can look at solutions. The issue is that we're looking at it from too far back because we don't have the finite resources to get in at that local level. That would also help with other things like malicious actors, people trying to gain access to waterways to either contaminate or steal the water, especially in things like drought. So there is a lot that can be done at the most local level when it comes to identifying problems that are isolated. But on the creative, innovative side of the house, we have some people who came out with like suitcase desal, and they're like, you could pump out 40 gallons of clean water in just this many hours for your family. And I was like, that's great. That sounds awesome. I love that as an idea. So we don't need these massive desal plants that take up all this space. But the downside is like, do I live there now? Because how do I move 40 gallons of water? Water is incredibly heavy. I don't understand how to transport that back home. Do I only pump out one or two? Some of these other implications, as we know, during major flood water events, when the water comes in and we start doing this discharge downstream, we don't necessarily, like we do with the truckers, have runaway ramps. We have some runaway ramps, but they just kind of like run away into their own repositories, but they could run away into additional storage capability underground to help hold more pockets, but only from flash flood events. So being able to do these sort of bonding mechanisms with places like, I believe it's Washington and Colorado, who have really started investing in burying water outside of aquifers, but using some of the stormwater runoff that we do take and putting it back into the aquifer is also super critical. For those who want to use the argument that, well, we do return some water into the aquifer, we never return as much as we're taking out. So it is a perpetual loss. Being able to make more use by identifying the inject points, which is missing across the board. We have a couple of areas that know their inject sites. Some of them have been paved over with developments. Looking at creative ways to make new inject sites. Should they be inject wells? Should they be their own drainage canals that go in based off of areas near major runoff problem sets? Being able to look at it holistically with topography mapping and comprehension of your area is something that we're missing, obviously at the top level, because I don't know that locality that well. But someone there does. And it's important to make use of those knowledge sets, bond to your locals, ask them these questions, say you're running into a problem and you're not sure how to fix it, and you showcase to them either using drawings on whiteboards or through like a 3D model, and you say, this is the problem, what would you do? And it really brings the community in, and it makes them more interested in the water sector. It makes them a lot more comprehensive when you end up with drought restrictions. And they're a lot more willing to come to the table across the board with other knowledge from families that are abroad, from other water sectors, from the reading they do. They all do research in their downtime. You can make use of them. So that's my big push, is it's not just innovation from our scientists and our innovators. It's also really repurposing the community by bringing them in and telling them there's a problem. It's a big problem. It's not one generation who did it. This was a non-comprehended issue. We didn't know we were going to get here. We didn't know it was going to all be interconnected like this. This is all really coming to a head from the 90s to now. And that's a very short period of life out of everything to have this applicable knowledge base to try to change the way we've done everything. So bringing everyone in is probably the best way forward, arguably.
Awesome. Is there any other questions? We're running on our last couple minutes here, 5-6 minutes. Any other questions from the group? This has been remarkable. Sunny, thank you very much. Yeah, let's wait and see.
I do want to make sure I advocate for anybody who goes out to do studies to really be aware. We know that when it's hot, we get cranky, we get aggressive. You'll notice general society is going to start becoming a lot more aggressive, but it's not just us. It is also the wildlife. The kune, the jabalina, I talk a lot about those because I've experienced it personally. The sharks, the alligators, the bears aren't hibernating as often. The snakes aren't hibernating as often. The spiders and scorpions are moving further inland. You're going to notice are further into homes and populated areas. When it's too hot in their climate, they will look to your microclimates. They will come further towards you, and they are in a heightened aggression state also. So to be aware that if you're out and about doing any sort of inspections, if you're out and about in general society, if you're out after a disaster in a disastered area, they're going to aggress upon you. And we're seeing instances go very quickly up across the board, across every state and other countries. So just a public messaging alert.
Thank you, Sunny. Sunny, I do have a quick question for you. So you talked a bit about when you go out to different industries, you really have to hone in on what's the financial implication. So I was wondering, what type of modeling have you done looking 5, 10, 20, 50 years out into the future, what it's going to cost these industries?
Yeah, so there's a fantastic buddy up that was done with FEMA. A couple of other DHS agencies all came to the table. We all sat down. We looked at different impacts to the building codes, right? So we know that some buildings are grandfathered in, some are old enough, they don't have to do XYZ. They created a really good baseline for understanding if you don't do something about it, you're going to pay X amount more than if you had done something to prevent it. So if we look at, for example, a square fence, you put it in, floodwaters come, they blow down the fence, you now have to put it back up. You do that 5 times. But if you had built a rounded fence, it stays up all 5 times, only goes down on the 6th time. You're able to really look at that as an immediate cost benefit analysis. FEMA's building codes graphic, which I believe just recently got republished for the update that's come out, that has those statistics on it that says for every $1 that you harden, you save $11 down the road. We have similar ones for the energy sector to say that if you put in the money now to change from wood to metal or to bury or to do this or to do that, you end up saving X many dollars as you go forward. So per sector that you're going to go speak to, I recommend finding the federal lead agency on it, because they've all started to create that exact statement in a infographic. You're able to go and find that pretty one pager that says, if you don't do anything, sure, it's $0 in the second, but it's so much more in just a couple of years. And if you look at the other damages in that same sector, which again is so easy to find, if you want to go and talk to the energy sector in Wyoming, find the last time a flood event, a landslide, a tornado, a derecho, any of those took out the energy sector in that area. See how long it was, how much in the media it made it, and then ask them how much that hurt and what did they do to prevent that from happening again? Because more often than not, they just rebuilt it. So you would be saying, okay, well, what if I said you're going to see that 5 more times per year going forward? Are you ready for that? And they're going to be like, no. You're like, so you should do something now because it hurt a lot before and it's going to get worse. So there's a twofold: look for the federal agency, look for the last time that sector got smacked around publicly. Because again, these weather events are very intense, and the last decade has given us amazing statistics from the amount of damage that has been done.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mr.
Very
Epring, Mark
candid
Christian.
feedback.
Another
See,
question.
she keeps saying cool stuff. I just want to keep asking questions.
No,
Are
hey,
y'all-
Mark, Sunny is one of the most remarkable humans I've ever met, and
Yeah.
please ask questions away while we have her. She is an expert about everything, so fire away.
Are y'all catching the statistics around this? So, right, so you're like, now we're talking about building out fragility curves, right? So it's a really good example of like distribution line pulse, right? Those are, you can do wind loading, fragility curves, but like, are you guys grabbing that for more complicated structures? Because that would be awesome if y'all are starting to pull that stuff too. Please.
So some of them are. So I spoke with the healthcare sector last year. We did a great exercise where I broke a bunch of their facilities with a wildfire, cyber attack, heat wave. And I was like, hey, what are you going to do? Because, this is coming up. And their response was to create this database, because I told them this is what we need, this exact phrase. We need a database of damage per sector. So what we need is, I need to know every time you went down, what the weather event was, what went down and for how long. And so they created a dashboard for their particular hospitals within their network. Every time that hospital went down, what the weather event was, so on and so forth. They then went, because it's not the hospital really losing power. The hospital is not the generator of power. So they then went from that hospital to the next distribution to them. So was it a substation? Was it a power plant? What went down? Was it the transmission lines? And they were able to immediately isolate and then go to that sector, that owner of that plant, and say, hey, look, we go down too often here from wind. It's going to get worse. We need to work together on figuring out what you're going to do so we have energy going forward. So it's not just buying a generator. It's sort of turning them in on each other without us collecting the data. Because again, that's a massive data set that we wouldn't be able to purpose on a day-to-day unless it was an argument style like this. But if you put the private sector to use, one, they have the funding to create amazingly beautiful dashboards. And two, they care so much that they're willing to aggress. So if you put them together and you show them the mirror, this is the problem, and they have your answer. It's not us. We can facilitate the conversation at the federal level, but I can't mandate the change. The most I could do would just be to point them at each other.
Perfect.
I can't
Thank
overreach. Yeah.
No, this is awesome. We are running out of time now, so I want to say thank you, Sunny. This has been awesome. If folks have some questions, I'm sure you can send them to some of the flow leadership, and we can get it to Sunny and get those back to you. And yes, this has been a remarkable call. So thank you, Sunny. And I want to say to everybody, if you're ever at an event with Sunny there, if she has time to grab a cup of coffee, it'll probably be the best cup of coffee and conversation you'll ever have. So thank you, Sunny. And yeah, have a great day, everyone.
Yeah. Really fast before y'all
sorry,
jump
Camelia.
off. No, just a quick recap for anyone who joined late. A couple items. Rising Star Award, we're working on reviewing those applications now. And if you submitted, you'll hear back mid-August. On our next flow call, it's on the 15th of August, same time. It's the state of the hydropower industry. we'll hear from a lot of industry experts. It's a good level set prior to Hydropower Day, which is August 24th. So keep all those dates on your calendars, and remember today is the last day for early bird registration. Sign up, and you have a flow discount code. So come join us at Queen Currents. Great. And we are definitely over time. So thank you all for joining. And Sunny, just want to echo what Norbert said. This has been fantastic, and we really appreciate the time and knowledge that you've shared. Great.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.
See you guys.